The phone rang at exactly 2:30 in the morning, pulling Natalie Chen from the deep sleep she desperately needed after a 12-hour shift at the Grand Lexington Hotel. She fumbled for her cell, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. Work. Of course it was work. The overnight concierge must have needed backup for something urgent, and since she lived closest to the hotel, they always called her first. "Hello." Her voice came out rough with sleep. "Natalie, it's Marcus at the desk. I'm so sorry to wake you, but we have a situation. VIP guest in the penthouse suite, and he's requesting assistance that requires someone with your language skills. He specifically asked for Mandarin fluency, and you know I barely speak English some days." Marcus tried to joke, but she could hear the stress in his voice. Natalie sat up, pushing her dark hair out of her face. "What does he need?" "He's trying to coordinate something with contacts in Beijing, but there's a major miscommunication happening. He's getting frustrated, and you know how Mr. Kellerman gets about keeping the VIPs happy." She glanced at her alarm clock and suppressed a groan. "Give me 20 minutes." Exactly 18 minutes later, Natalie walked through the employee entrance of the Grand Lexington, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her concierge uniform crisp despite the ungodly hour. She'd worked at this hotel for 3 years, starting right after she graduated from college with a degree in hospitality management and a minor in international business. The pay was decent, the benefits were good, and she genuinely enjoyed helping people navigate the city she loved. Marcus looked relieved when he saw her. "You're a lifesaver. He's in suite 4501. Name is Julian Hartwell. Been a guest here for the past week, but this is the first time he's needed anything beyond basic room service." Natalie took the master key card he offered. "What's he doing in Chicago?" "Business acquisitions, I think. He's been in meetings around the clock. Seems like a decent guy, just intense. Very focused." She made her way to the elevator, riding it up to the 45th floor while mentally preparing herself for whatever awaited. She'd dealt with plenty of demanding guests over the years, some pleasant, some less so. The key was maintaining professionalism and solving their problems efficiently. When she knocked on the suite door, it opened almost immediately. The man standing before her was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His white dress shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, his tie discarded somewhere, and his gray eyes held a mixture of frustration and exhaustion that she recognized all too well. "You must be the Mandarin speaker," he said, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. "Thank God. I've been on this call for 2 hours, and I think we're somehow managing to agree and disagree simultaneously. I have no idea what's actually happening." Natalie stepped inside, her professional smile in place. "I'm Natalie Chen, one of the senior concierges here. I understand you need translation assistance, Julian Hartwell." He shook her hand briefly, his grip firm and warm, and yes, desperately. "I'm trying to finalize details for a manufacturing partnership in Beijing, but my contact's English is about as good as my Mandarin, which is to say, non-existent beyond basic pleasantries. We're using a translation app, but something's getting lost in the process." She followed him into the suite's living area where a laptop sat open on the desk, documents scattered everywhere. A half-empty pot of coffee sat on the table, alongside what looked like the remnants of a very late dinner. "What's the main issue?" she asked, moving to stand where she could see the laptop screen. "We agreed on production numbers, or at least I thought we did. But then he sent this email, and when I put it through the translator, it says something completely different from what we discussed." Julian pulled up the message, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Natalie read the email, immediately spotting the problem. The translation app is too literal. He's using formal business language that has specific contextual meanings. When he says this phrase here, he's not questioning the numbers you agreed on. He's confirming them and asking about the timeline for implementation. Julian's shoulders visibly relaxed. So we're still on track. From what I'm reading, yes. He's actually complimenting your thoroughness and saying his team is impressed with your attention to detail. That's literally the opposite of what the app told me. Julian dragged a hand through his hair again. I've been sitting here thinking I'd somehow insulted him or violated some business protocol I didn't understand. Natalie smiled. Business communication between languages is tricky, especially with Mandarin. The formal register uses a lot of idioms and cultural references that don't translate directly. Would you like me to help you draft a response? Would you? That would be incredible. For the next hour, Natalie helped Julian compose responses to several emails, clarifying points of confusion and ensuring his tone matched the appropriate level of business formality. She found herself drawn into the details of what he was trying to accomplish, a partnership that would bring manufacturing jobs to both Chicago and Beijing, creating a supply chain that benefited both cities. You really care about this, she observed as he explained his vision for the project, his earlier frustration replaced by genuine enthusiasm. I spent 2 years developing this plan, Julian admitted. My company acquires struggling manufacturing businesses and revitalizes them. We don't just strip them for parts or ship jobs overseas. We find ways to make them sustainable and competitive while keeping people employed. This Beijing partnership is crucial because it gives us access to materials we need while also creating new positions there. It's not a zero-sum game. Natalie found herself genuinely impressed. Most of the wealthy businessmen she encountered at the hotel seemed primarily concerned with their own bottom line. Julian spoke about employment numbers and community impact with real passion. That's a refreshing approach, she said. He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. You sound surprised. I work in a luxury hotel. I meet a lot of people focused on profit margins and portfolio growth, not many who talk about sustainability and job creation at 3 in the morning. Julian's mouth quirked into a tired smile. It's 3 already, almost 4 actually. I've completely lost track of time and I've kept you here for hours. He looked genuinely apologetic. I'm so sorry. You must have a regular shift starting soon. Not until this afternoon, actually. They called me in as backup because of the language barrier. Natalie saved the final email draft and stepped back from the computer. But I should let you get some rest. You can send these emails now, and you should have responses by the time you wake up, given the time difference. Thank you. Seriously, you saved this deal. I'd still be sitting here spiraling into worst-case scenarios if you hadn't come. Julian walked her to the door, then hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you end up working hotel concierge with your language skills and obvious business acumen? You could probably be making twice as much in corporate translation or international consulting. The question caught her off guard. Most guests didn't see hotel staff as people with their own ambitions and stories. I like helping people, she said after a moment, and I like the variety. Every day is different, every guest needs something unique. Corporate consulting sounds lucrative but monotonous. That's fair. He studied her face for a moment and she felt her pulse quicken under his gaze. Well, I'm grateful the hotel has you, and that you were willing to come help at this ridiculous hour. It's what we're here for. She gave him her professional smile again, but it felt different now, warmer. Good luck with your partnership, Mr. Hartwell. Julian, please, Mr. Hartwell is my father and he's a tax attorney in Connecticut. Much more intimidating than I am." Natalie laughed. "All right. Good luck, Julian." She thought about him on and off throughout the rest of her shift the next day. It was silly, she knew. He was a guest, a VIP, someone passing through Chicago on business. He'd probably check out in a few days and she'd never see him again. That was the nature of hotel work. You met interesting people, had brief, meaningful interactions, and then they disappeared back into their own lives. But there'd been something about the way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her like an equal rather than staff. And his passion for his work had been genuinely attractive. Not the money or the power, but the purpose behind it. 2 days later, she was working the afternoon shift at the concierge desk when Julian came through the lobby. He spotted her and changed direction, walking over with a smile that made her heart do an inconvenient little flip. "Natalie, I was hoping I'd run into you." "How did the emails work out?" she asked. "Perfectly. We finalized everything yesterday and the contracts are being drawn up now. I genuinely don't think it would have happened without your help." He leaned against the desk, looking more relaxed than he had at 4 in the morning. He was wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly, his hair neatly styled, every inch the successful businessman. But his eyes still had that warmth she remembered. "I wanted to thank you properly." "You already did. A exhausted thank you at 4 a.m. doesn't count. Let me take you to dinner." Natalie's professional instincts kicked in. "That's very kind, but it's not necessary. I was just doing my job. I know you were, but I'd still like to take you to dinner." He held her gaze. "Not as a thank you, just as someone who'd like to get to know you better." She should say no. The hotel had policies about fraternizing with guests. But Julian would be checking out soon, and it was just dinner, and the way he was looking at her made her want to say yes more than she'd wanted anything in a long time. "When?" she heard herself ask. "Tomorrow night. I have one last meeting in the morning, then I'm free. Tomorrow works." His smile widened. "Great. Give me your number and I'll send you details." They exchanged information, and Natalie felt like a teenager with a crush for the rest of her shift. She couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop replaying the conversation in her mind. Maria, her coworker, finally pulled her aside. "Okay, what happened? You look like someone just told you that you won the lottery." "A guest asked me to dinner," Natalie admitted. "The hot businessman from the penthouse suite." "How did you know?" Maria rolled her eyes. "Everyone on staff has noticed him. He's gorgeous, he's polite, and he tips like someone who actually respects service workers. Half the housekeeping staff has a crush on him. He's just being nice." "Natalie, honey, men like that don't ask concierges to dinner just to be nice. He's interested." The thought sent a thrill through her. It's just one dinner. He's checking out in a few days anyway. But Maria's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that any more than Natalie did. The next evening, Natalie changed clothes 3 times before settling on a deep green dress that was elegant without being too formal. Julian had texted her the name of a restaurant in River North, a place she'd heard of but never been to, the kind of establishment where reservations required weeks of advance notice. She arrived exactly on time, her stomach fluttering with nervous energy. Julian was already there, standing near the entrance, and his face lit up when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice carrying a note of awe that seemed completely genuine. "Thank you. This place is incredible." She glanced around at the warm lighting, the exposed brick walls, the open kitchen where chefs moved with choreographed precision. "I've been wanting to try it since I got to Chicago. Seemed like the perfect occasion." He placed a hand on the small of her back as the host led them to their table, the touch gentle but sending electricity up her spine. Dinner was easy in a way Natalie hadn't expected. They talked about everything. Her childhood growing up in Chicago with parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan, his upbringing in Connecticut as the youngest of three brothers, her love of languages, and how she'd ended up fluent in Mandarin and conversational in Spanish and French. His decision to strike out on his own after working for his family's investment firm for 5 years. They wanted me to stay, follow the safe path, Julian explained over the main course. But I kept seeing these deals where we'd buy companies, gut them, sell off the assets and move on. It felt wrong. All those people losing their jobs while we celebrated profit margins. So I left and started my own firm, focused on acquisition and revitalization rather than liquidation. That must have been terrifying, Natalie said. It was. My father thought I was insane. My brothers took bets on how long I'd last before crawling back. He grinned. That was 7 years ago. I think I've proven my point. How big is your company now? We have about 200 employees across 5 offices. We've successfully revitalized 18 manufacturing operations in the past 4 years, saving or creating over 3,000 jobs in the process. He said it matter-of-factly, but she could hear the pride underneath. The Beijing partnership will be our biggest project yet. You should be proud. What you're doing matters. So does what you do. You made that deal possible. Languages are bridges, Natalie. You connect people who couldn't otherwise communicate. That's powerful. No one had ever described her job that way before. To most people, including her own parents sometimes, she was just a hotel employee helping tourists find restaurants and book theater tickets. But Julian saw the skill and value in what she did, and something in her chest warmed at the recognition. They lingered over dessert, talking until the restaurant staff began giving them pointed looks. When they finally left, Julian insisted on walking her to her car, even though it meant going several blocks out of his way. I had a really good time tonight, he said as they reached her sedan. So did I. Can I see you again before I leave? Her heart sank a little. When are you checking out? Day after tomorrow. But I'll be back in Chicago periodically. This partnership means I'll probably be here once a month for the foreseeable future. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. If you're interested in seeing where this goes. I'm interested, she said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. Julian leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart beating fast beneath her palms, matching her own racing pulse. When they broke apart, he was smiling. I'm definitely coming back to Chicago as often as possible. They saw each other once more before he checked out, a quick coffee between her morning shift and his afternoon flight. He kissed her goodbye in the hotel parking garage, promising to call as soon as he landed in New York. He kept that promise, and the ones that followed. Over the next 3 months, Julian called and texted regularly. They video chatted late at night when their schedules aligned. He sent her flowers at work, which made Maria mercilessly tease her, but also made her smile every time she walked past the concierge desk. And he came back to Chicago. Not once a month, as he'd initially predicted, but every 2 weeks. The Beijing partnership was complex, requiring his frequent presence for meetings and site visits to the Chicago manufacturing facility they were renovating. He always stayed at the Grand Lexington, always made time to see her, and slowly, steadily, Natalie found herself falling in love. It wasn't just the romantic dinners or the thoughtful gifts, though those were nice. It was the way he remembered small details she'd mentioned in passing. The way he asked about her parents and seemed genuinely interested in their lives. The way he supported her dreams, encouraged her to consider going back to school for her MBA even though she'd been putting it off for years. "You're brilliant," he told her one evening as they walked along the lake, the Chicago skyline glowing behind them. "You should be running a hotel, not working the concierge desk. I like what I do. I know you do, but you could like something even more." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not saying quit tomorrow. I'm just saying don't limit yourself because it feels safe." 6 months into whatever they were calling this relationship, Julian showed up at her apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening. She opened the door in yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair in a messy ponytail, completely unprepared for company. "I know I should have called," he said immediately, "but I needed to see you." "What's wrong?" Concern flooded through her. "Did something happen with the Beijing deal?" "No, the deal is fine. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." He stepped inside, his energy crackling with barely contained excitement. "The partnership is exceeding every projection. We're already looking at expanding to 2 more facilities. And I was sitting in my office in New York, looking at revenue reports and expansion plans, and all I could think about was how I wanted to tell you. How every good thing that happens, you're the first person I want to share it with." Natalie's heart was hammering now. "Julian." "I'm in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out like he couldn't hold them back anymore. "I've been in love with you probably since that first night when you showed up at 4 in the morning to help a stressed-out stranger and treated his work like it mattered. I know we've been doing this long-distance thing and it's not ideal, but I don't care about ideal. I care about you." She kissed him before he could say anything else, pouring 6 months of feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been terrified to say it because I didn't know how this could possibly work long-term, but I love you. We'll make it work." His arms tightened around her. "I don't know exactly how yet, but we'll figure it out." They did figure it out, though it took time and compromise. Julian started spending more time in Chicago, working remotely when possible. Natalie began looking seriously at MBA programs, encouraged by Julian's unwavering support. They learned each other's rhythms, their quirks and habits, the little things that made daily life work. A year after that first 4 a.m. phone call, Julian asked her to move in with him. Not to New York, where his company headquarters was located, but to Chicago, where his heart apparently now resided. He'd been apartment hunting for weeks, he admitted, looking for something that would feel like theirs rather than just his. "You're staying in Chicago?" she asked, stunned. "But your company is based in New York." "My company has 5 offices. I can run it from anywhere with decent internet and an airport." He pulled up photos on his phone, showing her a stunning loft in the West Loop with floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed beams. "What do you think?" "I think it's beautiful. I think you're insane. I think I can't believe you're doing this." "I'm doing this because I love you and you love Chicago, and honestly, I've fallen in love with this city too. It makes sense for the business. We're expanding our Midwest operations anyway." He cupped her face in his hands. "Say yes, Natalie. Move in with me. Build a life with me." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." Moving in together was an adjustment, but a good one. Natalie loved waking up next to Julian every morning, loved the lazy weekend mornings when they'd make breakfast together and read the paper side by side. She loved watching him work, the focused intensity he brought to every project, the way he genuinely cared about the people whose lives his business decisions affected. She also started her MBA program, taking evening classes while continuing to work at the Grand Lexington. It was exhausting, juggling work and school and a relationship, but Julian supported her completely. He'd quiz her for exams, raid her papers, celebrate her good grades, and hold her when the stress felt overwhelming. "You're going to be incredible," he told her after she aced a particularly difficult finance exam. "Some hotel chain is going to be very lucky to have you running their operations someday." "Maybe I'll start my own hotel," she mused. A boutique chain focused on cultural exchange and language accessibility. Every property would have multilingual staff and programs that connect travelers with local communities. Julian's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. We should develop a business plan." "I was joking." "I'm not." "Natalie, that's a genuinely innovative concept. There's a market for experiential travel that goes beyond typical tourism. If you're serious about it, even remotely, we should explore the feasibility." That conversation, half playful and half serious, planted a seed. Over the following months, Natalie found herself actually developing the idea, researching the market, identifying potential locations. Julian helped her crunch numbers and connect with people in the hospitality industry. What had started as a throwaway comment became a genuine business proposal. 2 years after they met, Julian took Natalie to dinner at the same River North restaurant where they'd had their first date. She should have suspected something, given how sentimental he could be, but she was distracted by telling him about a potential investor meeting for her hotel concept. "He loved the presentation," she said excitedly as they sat down. "He thinks there's real potential, especially if we start small with 1 or 2 properties and prove the concept before scaling up. He wants to meet again next month with his partners." "That's incredible." Julian was smiling, but he seemed nervous, his fingers drumming against the table. "Are you okay? You seem distracted." "I'm perfect. Just thinking about how much has changed since we sat at this exact table 2 years ago." He reached across and took her hand. "You were so beautiful that night." "You're even more beautiful now." "Flatterer." "I'm serious. You've grown so much, accomplished so much. Watching you develop this business plan, seeing your confidence increase, knowing I get to be part of your life, it's been the greatest privilege." He took a deep breath, then stood up and moved around the table. Natalie's heart stopped as he knelt down beside her chair. "I've been carrying this ring around for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment," Julian said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "But then I realized that being with you, every moment is perfect. So I'm asking you now, in the restaurant where we had our first date, where I first started to understand how extraordinary you are." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring that caught the light and threw sparkles across the table. "Natalie Chen, will you marry me?" She couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face, and everyone in the restaurant was watching, and all she could do was nod frantically. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, of course, yes." Julian slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her while the entire restaurant applauded. When they finally sat back down, both laughing and crying, Natalie couldn't stop staring at the ring. "It's too much," she said. "It's not nearly enough. Nothing would be enough, but I tried." He was grinning like an idiot, looking happier than she'd ever seen him. "I already asked your parents for their blessing, by the way. Took them to dinner last week." "You did not." "I absolutely did. Your father gave me the most terrifying lecture about respecting his daughter that I've ever received. Your mother cried and hugged me for 5 straight minutes. I think they approve." Natalie laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you. Believe it. You're stuck with me now." They got married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended both their cultures and families. Natalie's parents helped plan traditional tea ceremony elements, while Julian's family contributed their Connecticut social connections and his mother's impeccable taste in flowers. The result was a beautiful fusion that felt uniquely theirs. But the real magic happened during the reception, when Julian gave his toast. He stood up with a champagne glass, looking at Natalie with so much love that she felt her chest tighten, and spoke from the heart. "Most people have a story about when they knew," he said. "When they knew they'd found the person they wanted to spend their life with. For me, it was 4 in the morning in a hotel suite, watching this incredible woman solve my problems like they were the most important thing in the world, even though she'd been pulled from her bed to help a stranger. Natalie, you showed me that kindness and competence aren't mutually exclusive. You showed me that building a life with someone means supporting their dreams as fiercely as your own. You've made me better in every possible way, and I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to do the same for you." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including Natalie's. Life after the wedding was busier than ever. Julian's company continued expanding, adding new offices and new projects. Natalie completed her MBA while simultaneously launching the first property of her boutique hotel concept, a beautifully renovated building in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood that emphasized Latino culture and heritage. Julian had invested in the project, but he'd insisted it be her company, her vision, with him simply as a supportive partner. The hotel, which she named the Bridge in honor of how she thought about language and cultural connection, was an immediate success. Travel publications praised its innovative approach, guests loved the cultural programming and multilingual staff, and within a year, Natalie was already scouting locations for a second property. "You're a natural at this," Julian told her as they toured a potential building in San Francisco's Chinatown. "Look at you, negotiating like a seasoned real estate developer." "I learned from the best," she said, squeezing his hand. "You learned from yourself. I just got to watch." They were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that Natalie had never quite believed was possible. They worked hard, traveled often for both their businesses, maintained their friendships and family relationships, and somehow still made time for each other. Movie nights and cooking experiments and long walks along the lake. The big romantic gestures and the small daily kindnesses that actually sustained a relationship. 3 years into their marriage, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling off for weeks, exhausted and nauseous, assuming it was stress from opening her third hotel location. When the test came back positive, she sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, processing the information. She wasn't sure how Julian would react. They talked about kids in abstract terms, agreeing they wanted them eventually, but they'd both been so focused on building their businesses. Was this the right time? Would he be ready? She needn't have worried. When she told him that evening over dinner, showing him the positive test, his face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds before landing on pure joy. "We're having a baby." His voice cracked on the last word. "We're having a baby." Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you so much. We're going to be parents. Oh my God, we're going to be parents." Pregnancy was hard. Natalie had terrible morning sickness for the first trimester, followed by back pain and swollen ankles in the third. She tried to keep working at her usual pace, but eventually had to admit she needed to slow down. Julian, predictably, went into protective overdrive, hiring additional staff for the Bridge properties and insisting she take actual maternity leave. "You're creating a human being," he said when she protested. "That's more important than any business deal." "Easy for you to say. Your body isn't the one doing the creating. Which is exactly why I'm going to handle everything I can. You focus on growing our daughter." They were having a girl. They'd found out at the 20-week ultrasound, both of them crying as the technician pointed out tiny hands and feet. They'd already started debating names, a process that was both fun and occasionally contentious given their different cultural backgrounds and family naming traditions. Lily Chen Hartwell was born on a snowy February morning after 14 hours of labor. She came into the world screaming, a tiny angry bundle with a full head of dark hair in her mother's eyes. Julian cried when the nurse placed her in his arms, staring down at his daughter with such wonder that Natalie fell in love with him all over again. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." Being parents was exhausting and terrifying and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. They took turns with night feedings, learned to function on minimal sleep, and marveled at every tiny milestone. First smile, first laugh, first time she grabbed Julian's finger and held on tight. "I didn't know I could love someone this much," Julian admitted one night as they watched Lily sleep in her crib. "I thought I understood love because of you, but this is different. This is our family." Natalie leaned against him, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. This was their family, built on a foundation of a 4 a.m. phone call and mutual respect that had grown into genuine partnership and enduring love. When Lily was 6 months old, Natalie returned to work part-time. She'd hired a management team she trusted completely, people who shared her vision for the bridge and could handle day-to-day operations. Julian had done the same with his company, promoting key executives and creating systems that allowed him more flexibility. They both wanted to be present for their daughter, to not miss the precious, fleeting moments of her childhood because they were too busy chasing professional success. They'd achieved enough, built enough. Now it was about maintaining and enjoying what they'd created. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Julian surprised Natalie with a weekend getaway to a small bed and breakfast in Door County. Lily stayed with Natalie's parents, who were thrilled to have uninterrupted grandparent time, and for 48 hours, Julian and Natalie got to be just a couple again. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Natalie asked as they sat on the beach, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. "When you called the concierge desk at 2 in the morning, all the time. I think about how close I came to just struggling through on my own, too proud to ask for help. That one decision to call the desk changed everything." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best call I ever made. I almost didn't answer when they phoned me. I was so tired and I seriously considered letting it go to voicemail. Thank God you didn't." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors shift across the sky. Natalie thought about everything that had happened since that night. The dinners and the long-distance calls, the engagement and the wedding, the businesses they'd built, and the daughter they were raising. All of it traced back to that single moment when she dragged herself out of bed to help a frustrated stranger with a translation problem. "I love our life," she said softly. "So do I, and I love you. I love you too." When Lily turned 2, Natalie opened her 5th bridge property, this one in Boston with a focus on Irish and Italian immigrant history. Julian flew in for the grand opening, bringing Lily with him, and Natalie's heart nearly burst when she saw her daughter toddle through the lobby in a tiny dress, demanding to see Mommy's hotel. "What do you think, Lily Bug?" Julian asked, hoisting her up onto his shoulders. "Pretty cool what Mommy built, right?" "Big," Lily announced, her favorite word for anything impressive. The opening was a massive success, with local press coverage and a waitlist for reservations extending months into the future. Natalie fielded questions from journalists about her expansion plans, her design philosophy, her commitment to cultural authenticity in each property. She was confident and articulate, every inch the successful entrepreneur, But her favorite moment was later that evening when the crowds had cleared, and it was just her, Julian, and Lily exploring the empty building. "You should be so proud," Julian said, watching her show Lily the custom murals in the dining room. "This is incredible. All of it, everything you've built. You've created something really special." "We've created something special," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support." "You absolutely could have. You're the most capable person I know, maybe, but it's better doing it with you." They continued building their life together, year after year. Lily grew from a toddler into a bright, curious little girl who spoke English and Mandarin fluently thanks to her grandmother's patient teaching. She loved visiting her mother's hotels, helping Julian in his office, and asking approximately 1 million questions about everything. When she was 4, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less joyful. They'd been talking about giving Lily a sibling, and while the timing wasn't perfect, it never really was. "Lily's going to be thrilled," Julian said, his hand splayed across Natalie's still flat stomach. "She's been asking for a baby brother or sister for months. What if it's another girl? She specifically requested a brother. Then she'll have to adjust her expectations. Either way, our family is growing." James Chen Hartwell arrived that fall, a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world with serious dark eyes. Lily immediately appointed herself his protector and helper, bringing him toys and singing to him, and reporting every movement to her parents like a tiny researcher documenting an important subject. Life with 2 kids was chaotic in the best way. The house was louder, messier, fuller. Natalie and Julian traded off bedtime stories and school pickups, coordinated schedules with the precision of military generals, and somehow still found moments to be a couple. Date nights became precious, whether they were fancy dinners out or just takeout on the couch after the kids were asleep. "Remember when we thought we were busy before?" Natalie asked one particularly hectic morning when Lily had lost her favorite shoes. James was crying because he'd dropped his sippy cup, and they were both already running late. "I remember thinking we knew what tired meant," Julian replied, finding the shoes under the couch while simultaneously heating a bottle. "We were adorable and naive, but despite the chaos, neither would have changed anything." This was the life they'd built together, messy and beautiful and exactly what they wanted. On their 10th anniversary, Julian insisted on recreating their first date. They went back to the same River North restaurant, requested the same table where he'd proposed, and spent the evening reminiscing about a decade of memories. 10 years, Natalie marveled. "How are you not sick of me yet?" "Not possible. I fall more in love with you every day." He raised his wine glass. "To 10 years and to 50 more. 50 more," she echoed, clinking her glass against his. They talked about everything that night, the businesses they'd built and how they might evolve them as the kids got older. Travel they wanted to do as a family. Dreams they still had individually and together. It was the kind of deep, rambling conversation that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, the recognition that they were partners in every sense of the word. "I need to tell you something," Julian said as dessert arrived. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I want your honest opinion." "That sounds ominous." "It's not bad, I promise. I've been considering stepping back from some of my operational duties at the company, promoting my COO to CEO and transitioning myself into more of a chairman role." He watched her face carefully. "I want more time with you and the kids. I've spent 10 years building this company into something sustainable. I think I've earned the right to let other people run it while I focus on what really matters." Natalie felt emotion well up in her chest. "Are you sure? You love that company." "I love our family more. The company will be fine, better than fine, probably. But Lily's in kindergarten and James is starting preschool, and I don't want to miss things because I'm too busy with board meetings and acquisition deals. He squeezed her hand. I want to coach their soccer teams and show up for school plays and take family vacations without my phone constantly ringing. Is that crazy? No, it's perfect. She leaned across the table to kiss him. It's absolutely perfect. Julian made the transition over the following year, carefully handing over responsibilities while maintaining his strategic vision for the company. It was the right decision. He seemed lighter, happier, more present. He still worked, still attended important meetings and weighed in on major decisions, but the daily grind fell to others. Natalie, meanwhile, made her own adjustments. The bridge had grown to 10 properties across the country, and she'd brought in a CEO to manage operations while she focused on creative direction and new development. She wanted the same thing Julian did, more time with their family, the freedom to be present for the small moments that actually mattered. They found a rhythm that worked for them. Both still engaged in their professional lives, but with boundaries that protected their personal time. Family dinners every night when possible. Weekend adventures to museums and parks, and anywhere the kids wanted to explore. Annual vacations where they actually disconnected from work and just enjoyed being together. Lily and James grew up surrounded by love and stability, two parents who were clearly devoted to each other and to them. They learned Mandarin from their grandmother and business strategy from watching both their parents. They traveled for their mother's hotel openings and their father's occasional business trips, collecting experiences instead of toys. "We're raising good humans," Natalie said one evening as they watched the kids play in the backyard, Lily carefully teaching James how to climb the treehouse ladder. "We really are. They're kind and curious and confident." Julian pulled her close. "Just like their mother, they get their determination from their father. They get the best parts of both of us, and hopefully none of the neurotic tendencies." Natalie laughed. "Unlikely." Lily already organizes her dolls by size and color scheme. "That's concerning." Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The kids started elementary school, made friends, developed their own interests and personalities. Lily was creative and methodical, loving art projects and building elaborate structures with blocks. James was more physical, constantly in motion, drawn to sports and outdoor activities. The bridge expanded internationally, with properties opening in London and Tokyo, both focused on cross-cultural exchange and language immersion. Natalie traveled for the openings, sometimes bringing the whole family, sometimes going solo while Julian managed things at home. They'd learned to balance, to support each other's ambitions while maintaining their family as the central priority. On a quiet Tuesday evening when Lily was 9 and James was 7, they were all sitting around the dinner table when James asked the question that had apparently been on his mind. "How did you and Daddy meet?" Natalie and Julian exchanged a glance, smiling at the shared memory. "Daddy called me at 2 in the morning," Natalie said. "He needed help with something for work and I went to his hotel to help him." "At 2 in the morning," Lily looked scandalized. "That's the middle of the night," it was. "But sometimes when people need help you show up, even if it's inconvenient." Natalie reached across the table to take Julian's hand. "And sometimes showing up changes your whole life." "Did you know right away?" Lily pressed. "That you were going to get married?" "No," Julian answered. "But I knew your mom was special. I knew I wanted to see her again. And then I kept wanting to see her again and again until I couldn't imagine my life without her." "That's romantic," Lily sighed, already a dreamer at 9 years old. "It's gross," James declared, making a face. "Why are we talking about this at dinner?" They all laughed, and the conversation moved on to homework and weekend plans, but Natalie held on to the moment. The reminder of how it all started, how one phone call in the middle of the night had led to this entire beautiful life. That night, after the kids were in bed, she and Julian sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, enjoying the late spring weather. "I was thinking about something today," Julian said. "That hotel where we met, the Grand Lexington, it's being sold apparently. The current owners are retiring and looking for a buyer." Natalie looked at him sharply. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? The bridge started with boutique properties, but you've always said you might expand into larger hotels eventually. The Lexington is iconic, well located, and already has the infrastructure. You could transform it into something amazing while preserving what makes it special." He grinned. "Plus, there's sentimental value. That's insane. It would be our biggest acquisition by far, and the investment required would be enormous. You have the capital, you have the team, you absolutely have the vision." He turned to face her fully. "I think you should seriously consider it. At minimum, talk to your board and run the numbers." The idea lodged itself in Natalie's brain and wouldn't let go. Over the next few months, she did exactly what Julian suggested. She talked to her board, ran feasibility studies, toured the property with her design team, and developed a comprehensive plan for how the bridge could honor the Lexington's history while updating it for modern travelers. It was ambitious, maybe crazy, but also exciting in a way she hadn't felt about a project in years. "I'm going to do it," she told Julian one evening after the final board vote had come through in her favor. "We're buying the Grand Lexington. I know you are, and it's going to be incredible." The acquisition and renovation took nearly 2 years. Natalie poured herself into the project, working with architects and designers to preserve the building's historic character while adding modern amenities and the cultural programming that defined the bridge brand. She interviewed former staff members, collecting stories about the hotel's history. She made sure that dedicated employees like Marcus, who still worked at the property, were retained and valued in the new organization. And she kept the concierge desk exactly where it had always been, with a small plaque that read, "Here to help, any time of day or night." The grand reopening was a massive event, with press from around the world and reservations booked solid for 6 months. But for Natalie, the most meaningful moment was standing in that renovated lobby with Julian and their kids, looking around at what she'd built. "This is where we met," she told Lily and James, pointing toward the elevator banks. "Daddy was staying in a suite upstairs, and I came here to help him at 2 in the morning. And now Mommy owns the whole building," Julian added, pride clear in his voice. "Pretty amazing, right?" "It's really big," James said, his eyes wide as he took in the soaring ceilings and elegant decor. "It's beautiful," Lily breathed. "Just like your other hotels, but bigger." That night, after the official celebrations were over and the kids were home with a babysitter, Natalie and Julian checked into the penthouse suite. The very same suite where they'd met all those years ago, now completely renovated but still holding the energy of that first encounter. "Should I call the concierge desk?" Julian teased. "Pretend I need translation help. I think we're past that." Natalie wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him close. "But we could recreate some other parts of that night. I like the way you think." They made love in that penthouse suite, the city lights of Chicago spreading out below them, and it felt like coming full circle. From that first meeting to this moment, building a life and a family and careers they were both proud of. All because she'd answered a late-night phone call and he'd been willing to ask for help. Later, lying in bed with Julian's arms around her, Natalie thought about everything that had led them here. The coincidences and choices, the hard work and the lucky breaks. The way their lives had woven together so completely that she couldn't imagine any other path. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Julian replied, his voice sleepy and content. "Thank you for answering that phone call. Thank you for making it." They fell asleep in that suite, in the building where their story began, surrounded by everything they'd created together. And when morning came, they'd wake up and keep building, keep growing, keep choosing each other every single day. Because that was what love really was, not just the dramatic moments and grand gestures, though those mattered too. It was the daily choice to show up for each other, to support each other's dreams, to build a life that felt authentic and meaningful to both of them. Lily and James grew into teenagers, both smart and driven like their parents but with their own unique paths. Lily developed a passion for architecture and design, spending hours sketching building concepts and accompanying her mother on property tours. James discovered a love for environmental science, constantly dragging the family on nature hikes and lecturing them about sustainability. "They're not going to just inherit our businesses," Julian observed one evening as they watched Lily present a design concept for her school project. "They're going to do their own things." "Good. They should." Natalie squeezed his hand. "We built what mattered to us. They need to do the same." The bridge continued to expand, with 20 properties worldwide by the time Lily graduated high school. Each one maintained the core mission of cultural exchange and language accessibility, creating spaces where travelers could genuinely connect with local communities. Natalie had built something that mattered, something that changed how people experience the world. Julian's company had evolved too, focusing increasingly on sustainable manufacturing and green technology. He'd returned to more active leadership as the kids got older, energized by a new mission to make industrial operations environmentally responsible. He and James often collaborated on research and ideas, bonding over their shared passion for environmental protection. On their 20th anniversary, Natalie and Julian took a trip to Beijing, visiting the manufacturing facility that had started everything. The partnership had exceeded every expectation, creating hundreds of jobs and serving as a model for international collaboration. Walking through the facility, seeing the efficient operations and engaged workers, they both felt profound satisfaction. "This is where it all clicked," Julian said as they toured the factory floor. "When I realized I could build something that mattered, that success didn't have to come at someone else's expense, and it never would have happened without you. You would have figured it out eventually, maybe. But having you there that night, helping me communicate clearly and making me feel like my vision mattered, that gave me confidence to keep pushing forward." He pulled her close, despite the noise of the machinery around them. "You've always believed in me, even when I doubted myself." That's what partners do. From Beijing, they traveled to several of the bridge's international properties, mixing business with pleasure. They walked through Tokyo's busy streets, explored London's historic neighborhoods, and spent a week in Paris, where Natalie was considering opening her next property. "We should bring the kids here next summer," Julian suggested as they sat at a cafe near the Seine, watching boats drift past. "They're old enough now to really appreciate it." Lily would love the architecture. James would probably spend the whole time researching the city's environmental initiatives. So basically, they'd both have a great time doing completely different things, and we'd spend all our time coordinating separate activities. Natalie laughed. "Exactly. Family vacations in the teenage years are so glamorous." But they did bring the kids the following summer, and despite the challenges of traveling with teenagers who had their own opinions about everything, it was wonderful. They explored museums and restaurants, practiced Natalie's French, and created memories that would last long after the kids left home for college. Which happened, eventually, though it felt both too fast and like it took forever. Lily went to architecture school in California, immediately thriving in the creative environment. James chose environmental engineering at a university in Colorado, drawn by the proximity to mountains and outdoor research opportunities. The house felt too quiet without them. Natalie and Julian wandered around for weeks, adjusting to the empty nest, rediscovering what it meant to be just the two of them again. "We should travel more," Julian suggested one evening as they ate dinner at the table that used to be surrounded by kids and noise. "Take that trip to Thailand we've been talking about for years. Visit all your properties and actually vacation at them instead of just working." "We should," Natalie agreed. "But also I kind of like the quiet sometimes. Is that terrible? It's honest. We've spent 20 years being parents first and everything else second. It's okay to enjoy having our lives back." They did travel more, taking trips both for business and pure pleasure. They also invested more time in their marriage, going on dates, trying new restaurants, taking dance classes just because it sounded fun. They'd never stopped being in love, but with the kids gone, they had space to remember what they'd been like before parenthood complicated everything. "I like us like this," Natalie said one evening as they swayed together in their living room, practicing the tango steps they'd learned that week. "I love being a mom and I miss the kids, but I also really like just being your wife. I like being your husband. Always have, but especially now when we can be spontaneous again." He spun her out and back in, making her laugh. "We should go away this weekend, just pick a place and go." They did exactly that, developing a habit of spontaneous weekend trips. Sometimes to cities where the bridge had properties. Sometimes to random small towns they'd never visited. Sometimes just to luxury resorts where they could disconnect completely. Life settled into a new rhythm, different from the chaos of raising kids but equally fulfilling. They were still partners in every sense, still supporting each other's work, still making each other laugh. The foundation they'd built over 2 decades was solid enough to weather any change. When Natalie turned 50, Julian threw her a surprise party that brought together friends and family from across the country. Lily and James flew in, along with Natalie's parents, Julian's brothers and their families, colleagues from both their companies, and friends they'd accumulated over the years. "I can't believe you did this," Natalie whispered as she looked around at all the people gathered to celebrate her. "You deserve it. You deserve everything." Julian kissed her temple. "Happy birthday, love." The speeches that night were full of humor and heart. Lily talked about growing up with a mother who showed her that women could build empires while still being present for their families. James joked about his mom's tendency to correct everyone's pronunciation in multiple languages. Natalie's father spoke proudly about his daughter, who'd exceeded every dream he'd had for her. And Julian gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about the woman who'd changed his life by answering a phone call, who'd built businesses and a family with equal dedication, who'd made every day of the past 25 years better just by being in it. "Here's to the next 25, he finished, raising his glass, "and to loving you more with each one." More years passed, as they always did. Lily got married to a fellow architect, a thoughtful woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into their family. James brought home a girlfriend named Emma, a marine biologist who shared his passion for environmental conservation. The family continued to grow and evolve, adding new members and new traditions. Natalie and Julian became grandparents when Lily and Sarah used a donor to have a baby, a little boy they named Henry. Holding her grandson for the first time, Natalie felt the circle of life click into place. She'd been someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. Now she was someone's grandmother, and the role filled her with unexpected joy. "He has your eyes," Julian said, looking down at Henry sleeping peacefully in Natalie's arms. "He has Lily's everything, but maybe he'll get my talent for languages. Or my talent for making impulsive business decisions that somehow work out. Let's hope for the languages." They settled into grandparenthood with enthusiasm, babysitting regularly and spoiling Henry shamelessly. When James and Emma had twins a few years later, a boy and a girl they named Oliver and Sophie, Natalie and Julian's lives became even fuller. The bridge had grown to 35 properties worldwide, and Natalie had finally stepped back from day-to-day operations entirely, though she remained chairman of the board and still consulted on major decisions. Julian had fully retired from his company, which continued to thrive under new leadership. They'd both reached a point where they could enjoy the fruits of their decades of hard work. On their 30th anniversary, they went back to the Grand Lexington, now one of the flagship properties of the Bridge Collection. The hotel had been renovated twice since Natalie had acquired it, but she'd always kept the concierge desk exactly as it was, that same spot where she'd worked all those years ago. They checked into the penthouse suite, a tradition now, and spent the evening reminiscing about 3 decades of marriage. The highs and the lows, the challenges and the triumphs, the ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked as they stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline that had been the backdrop for their entire relationship. Julian thought about it seriously before answering. "I regret some of the time I spent working when the kids were little. I regret not taking more vacations earlier. I regret that we waited so long to take that trip to Thailand." He turned to face her. "But I don't regret a single moment with you. Every choice that led me to you, every decision we made together, I'd make them all again. Even calling the concierge desk at 2 in the morning, especially that. Best decision of my entire life." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch still making her heart race even after 30 years. "I love you, Natalie. I love the life we built, the family we created, the people we became together. You are my greatest adventure. I love you too. Always have, always will." They kissed in that penthouse suite, in the spot where their story began, and it felt both exactly the same and completely different from that first kiss in a parking garage 3 decades ago. They'd grown and changed, weathered storms and celebrated victories, raised children and built businesses. But through it all, they'd chosen each other. Every single day, they'd chosen each other, and they would keep choosing each other for whatever time they had left. Whether that was 10 more years or 40, they would spend it together, grateful for the random chance and deliberate choices that had brought them to this place. Because that's what their love story really was. A phone call and an answered summons, followed by 30 years of showing up. For each other, for their family, for the life they built together. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A partnership, a friendship, a romance that deepened with time instead of fading. Natalie looked around the suite, thinking about everything that had happened since that first night. The nervous first date, the long-distance phone calls, the proposal and the wedding. Lily's birth and James's arrival. The businesses they'd built and the risks they'd taken. The quiet mornings and the busy evenings, the laughter and the tears, the everyday moments that had somehow created this beautiful tapestry of a life. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For calling. For asking me to dinner. For loving me even when I was too scared to believe it could work." For 30 years of being exactly who I needed. Julian pulled her close, and they swayed together without music, dancing in the suite where everything started. Outside, Chicago glowed against the night sky, their city, the place where they'd found each other and built a life. And somewhere in that building, at the concierge desk that Natalie had preserved through every renovation, the phone sat ready to ring. Ready to connect people, solve problems, and maybe, just maybe, change someone's life with a single 2 a.m. call. Because that's what had happened to them. One call, one moment of connection, had led to everything. And neither of them would trade it for anything in the world.